I never thought I'd be the sort of person to believe in ghosts or restless spirits trapped between worlds, yet here I am, standing on the edge of a decaying dock, staring out over the mirror black surface of Lake Lanier, wondering what senseless hunger drew me back here. My husband, John, inherited this crumbling lake house from his grandmother, who'd lived here since the 60s, long after the town of Oscarville was swallowed by these very waters. They flooded the valley in 1955 to create the reservoir, submerging churches, schools, homes, and graves. He said the house was a fresh start for us, a place to heal after I lost our baby last spring. I thought it might be too, until the night I heard the crying. It began the first evening, mere hours after we unpacked. I wandered down to the dock seeking silence, the weight of emptiness pressing on my chest. The wooden boards groaned beneath my slippers as I stepped to the edge, the sky above streaked with purple twilight. John had promised me serenity. He called it nature therapy. Then I heard it, a soft, keening sob that seemed to rise from directly under my feet. I froze. The lake lay motionless, no breeze rippling the surface, no motorboat slicing through the water, only that mournful cry, like a child lost in the dark. I knelt and pressed my ear to the dock's planks. The sobbing sharpened, punctuated by low, gurgling moans that sounded too human. I staggered upright, heart hammering. No logical explanation fit. No wildlife in this part of Georgia made sounds like that. Back in the house, I forced a laugh. Probably raccoons, I said, or the old pipes. John gave me the dismissive look, full of sympathy for my grief. But that night, when I woke to check the time, I caught a glimpse of movement on the dock through the curtains. Something pale, slinking at the water's edge. I blinked, and it was gone. Over the next week, the sobbing became ritualistic, always between midnight and 2 a.m, always the same hollow plea, as though drowned spirits reached up from their watery graves to remind the living they remembered. I tried to document it. I set up the handheld camcorder John had bought for his fishing trips. The first night, I retrieved the footage. The timestamp bleeped at 1:47 a.m, and the audio track captured a whispery voice, clearly saying my name, Emma. I played it back a dozen times, convinced it was a trick of the wind or audio feedback, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. No wind blew that night, the air was too still. Then I saw the tombstones. It was a moonless evening when I shone my flashlight into the lake. The beam passed through 10 feet of water before it caught on pale, rectangular shapes clustered like a phantom graveyard. Crosses carved into the stone emerged from under the dock's edge, half buried in slit. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back, dropping the torch. The water swallowed the light instantly, plunging the area into darkness. I fumbled back to the house, pounding at John's door. He opened it, bleary-eyed, and I nearly pushed him into the living room. But by the time he pulled on his slippers and followed me outside, the tombstones and the dock were gone. John remained skeptical until the night he experienced it for himself. I'd be curled up on the couch reading, trying to ignore the niggling dread in my veins. I heard his voice, low and panicked, calling for me from the dock. I found him sitting on the edge, flashlight in hand, trembling like a leaf. The beam waved over empty water. I heard her, he said, voice crackling. A woman, singing. I knelt beside him, peering into the black. We listened. First a lullaby, sweet and haunting, drifting through the humid night air. Then came the soft patter of footsteps, barefoot, on the wood behind us. We whirled around, but saw nothing, only our wide-eyed reflections in the dark window of the cabin. When we looked back at the water, The singing stopped. A single voice moaned, "Stay with us." Then silence. That night, we fled to the guest bedroom. We didn't speak until dawn. I resolved to end this, whatever it was. I borrowed John's diving gear under the guise of retrieving the dropped camera, but in truth, I planned to confront the heart of this horror. I set out at twilight, the sky a bruised purple. I dove off the dock, submerging into icy water that stung my lungs. My torch cut a yellow path through the gloom. I swam down to the spot where I seen those phantom gravestones. Then I felt it, a slow brushing against my calf. My stomach lurched. I spun, torch beam dancing over nothing but murky water. My hand slipped into something slimy, cold as death. I yanked away and kicked upwards. I broke the surface in a coughing frenzy. The torch floated beside me, its beam sweeping across the lake as if searching. And then I saw her, standing at the end of the dock, her form blurred by waves. She was young, perhaps 19 or 20, her skin so pale it glowed in the torchlight. Her long hair fanned around her shoulders like dark water. An old-fashioned dress clung to her frame. Her eyes, hollow pits, fixed on me. Her lips parted in a silent scream. I couldn't move. My fingers curled around the torch handle as the water around me grew impossibly still. She lifted one hand, beckoning. In that instant, my mind snapped back to the town's history. Oscarville, flooded with all its secrets, its tragedies. Families buried in unmarked graves beneath these depths. She tilted her head. Then, with impossible speed, she lunged. I strode back, scrambling on the dock. The torch clattered from my grip and sank. I didn't wait. I ran, the sound of her wails echoing in my ears as the dock shredded beneath my feet. By the time I slammed the cabin door shut, dawn was seeping through the curtains. John was already awake, blanket clutched in his fist. "They want you," he whispered, voice raw. "They want us all." We spent the morning in a daze. I showed him the ripples in the water where I surfaced and the place the camera had fallen. We combed the shoreline. No camera, no footprints leading away from the dock. It was as though the lake itself had erased every trace. We packed our bags in silence. I left behind clothes, toiletries, even John's fishing rods. All that mattered was getting away. Months later, I sit in my flat in London, staring at rain streaked windows. Every night at exactly 1:47 a.m, I swear it by my own damning footage, I hear a whisper over the wind, "Come back." They watch you from below. I warn anyone who will listen. The drowned remember every face, every name carved on those hidden stones, and they want company. I had always loved the idea of escaping into the wilderness. The city's concrete walls felt like they were closing in on me, grinding my nerves thin after the stress of final exams. So when two of my best friends, Jenna and Marcus, suggested we rent a secluded cabin on the shores of Foss Lake, Oklahoma, I jumped at the chance. Foss Lake was the sort of place that thrived on rumour. Two camping parties, decades apart, simply disappeared into the woods. The first in the summer of 1969, the second in 1970. Their cars were found submerged in the lake's murky depths years later. Windows rolled down, no sign of struggle inside. Local legends said the water wanted something, wanted people to join the sunken vehicles in eternal silence. I dismissed it all as small town myth, ghost hunter hype, the kind of thing tourists told each other around the fire to jolt a thrill. But as our rented Ford creaked over the gravel drive and the cabin's windows stared at us like empty eye sockets, I felt that old thrill twist into an unease. The air smelled of wet pine needles and rotten autumn leaves decaying on the forest floor. The lake's surface was glassy, reflecting a sky so grey it felt ready to swallow us whole. We unpacked in a hurry. Jenna set our backpacks by the door, Marcus poked at the firewood, and I explored the cabin's single room. Wood-panelled walls, a sagging sofa, a coffee table scarred by cigarette burns, and in the corner, an ancient spiral notebook with brittle pages poking from its spine. No title, no date, just soiled pages filled with yellowed newspaper clippings and water-stained photos. I lifted it with care, trembling at how heavy it felt, heavy with history, heavy with secrets. That first evening, we built a small fire and cracked open beer bottles, telling jokes louder than necessary to drown out the wind scratching at the window panes. But the notebook caught my eye. Jenna noticed before anyone else. "What's that?" she asked, nodding at the spiral-bound book I was flipping through. I showed it to them. Inside were faded clippings, headlines screaming, "Campus vanished without trace." Grainy black and white photos of two cheerful couples waving at the camera, and a scrawled note in cursive ink, "They don't want to leave." I flipped to a blank page at the end. In soft pencil, someone had written, "Help us, before midnight." My stomach clenched. Marcus laughed nervously. "At midnight? What, is it a deadline? Like the lake's mailing list expires?" I wanted to laugh back, but my throat felt constricted. The clock on the mantel ticked towards 10. Outside the wind gusted, rattling the shutters. We decided to sleep on it, no ghost hunts tonight. Jenna turned in, and I carried the notebook into the loft and slid under the thin blanket. Moonlight filtered through a cracked window, illuminating the notebook's cover. I idly traced the water stains with my finger until sleep finally claimed me. I woke suddenly at 11:59 p.m. to the shrill trill of the cabin phone. The streak was so loud it made me flinch. Sweat bursting on my skin despite the chill. The phone, an antique rotary model, had no cord. It sat untouched on a rickety side table. I flew down the ladder in my pyjamas, heart slamming against my ribs. Jenna laid curled under the blanket. Marcus fumbled for the receiver. He lifted it, pressing it against his ear. Silence. Then a crackle, static, and a distant scream echoing through the line. The scream trembled with terror and desperation, cut short by a hollow click. The phone went dead. Marcus let the receiver drop. "That was not a prank," he whispered, his face white. Jenna turned on the bedside lamp and shone it at the phone. The cordless base sat empty, no sign of battery packs or power wires. This model didn't work on power, yet it had just rang and emitted that scream. At dawn, I checked the notebook again. The blank page was still blank, but the pencil lay beside it, sharpened as if someone had used it. No fingerprints, no new entries. That afternoon, we went hiking along the old logging trail. The forest was alive with rustling leaves and the occasional crow calling from the heights. We joked, we took photos, we ignored how quickly dusk would close in on us. Night fell too fast. Back at the cabin, we ate ramen by the flickering lantern light as we piled dishes by the sink. Jenna froze. "Did you hear that?" A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap came from the wooden porch above us. We hushed the chatter and listened. The porch planks creaked under the weight of invisible footsteps moving back and forth, walking towards the edge, then away, one solitary walker pacing and waiting. Marcus swallowed hard. "Nobody's out there," he said, voice shaky. The tapping stopped. A heavy silence followed, the kind that presses into your ears until you can almost taste it. That night, the wind howled like animals in pain. I found myself drawn to the notebook once more and flipped through the clippings of old news articles. Campus seen at dusk, the second party's tent slashed from within, mechanical parts of the sunken cast discovered tangled in vines. I closed it, heart pounding. then crossed to the living room wall. My flashlight caught on a dark shape behind the couch. Scribbled messages, fresh and jagged, scrawled in charcoal dust. Leave now. Don't look back. Help us. We all froze. Jenna dropped her ramen cup. It shattered. The shards glinted under the lantern light like broken teeth. I spun the flashlight beam across the remaining walls. No more writing, just our reflections dancing in the glass of the windows, eyes wide. By nightfall, we barely spoke. Fear had woven between us, slick as the mold growing in the corners of the cabin. I slept with the notebook under my pillow. Jenna clutched her phone as if she could call for help, and Marcus roamed the cabin with a baseball bat. At midnight, the phone rang again. We leapt apart. Marcus grabbed the handset. This time, instead of screams, a soft humming, an old folk tune, spilled from the receiver. A child's voice joined in, high and thin, warbling the melody off key, then the line went dead. Jenna screamed, "That's from the journal! That song's in the article about the first missing couple!" She backed into the wall. "They sang it before they vanished." We huddled in the centre of the room. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the windows. For a heartbeat, I saw them, two pale figures outside, standing waist deep in the lake, their forms translucent in the flash. They stared at us, arms outstretched, but by the time the thunder rolled, they had vanished. Desperate, we bolted for the canoe tied to the dock. Marcus shoved Jenna in first, I clambered after. Rain lashed my face. The wooden oars felt slick and windy, but we paddled out anyway, headed for the cars rumoured to sit just beyond the breakwater. The water closed over the canoe's gunwales, waves slapping against the hull. I peered over the side, nothing but blackness, until I saw the headlights, dim glows 30 feet beneath, swivelling like search beams in the depth. We reached the first car. The roof had collapsed under pressure, the doors were half ajar. Marcus shone his light through the windows. In the back seat, a single item, my driver's license, lying face up on the soggy fabric. The name and the license number gleamed back at me. My breath caught. "How?" I whispered. Then the canoe rocked violently. Something grabbed the stern, jerking us sideways. The motor of panic in my chest kicked on. The headlights flickered, and I saw them again. 3 pairs of eyes, black as oil, peering up from the submerged vehicle. A cold, clammy hand shot out of the water, slapping against the hole under my seat. I screamed. Jenna shrieked, and Marcus shouted curses I couldn't recognise. I reached for the oar, hacking at the motion beneath me. The hand retreated, then reappeared with more fingers, dozens, twisting like kelp vines. The boat lurched, water sloshed in. Before I could pull myself out, a weight dragged me under. I woke gasping at dawn, lying on the muddy shoreline. The sky bled pink, my shirt was torn, soaked through with lake water. The canoe was capsized, resting against the roots of a fallen cypress, and Jenna and Marcus were gone. I stumbled to my feet, vision blurred. Scraps of the notebook littered the mud, ripped, pages torn free, floating in dark puddles. I pressed my hand against my mouth, bile rising. A single photo snapped my blood cold. Me, standing in the canoe, eyes wide with terror, reaching out as the oar slipped from my grip. On the back, in shaky handwriting that was unmistakably mine, "I'm sorry." I don't remember getting back to the cabin. I don't remember dialing 911, and when the police arrived, they found only me, dripping and hysterical, clutching the damp photo. My friends were never seen again. They searched the lake for days. Divers felt something brush their legs, like limbs swirling in the slit, but they found nothing conclusive. The cars were still there, windows rolled down, trunks stiff with slit, but the bodies were gone. I moved back to the city within a week. My therapist says I'm lucky to be alive. Other survivors at Floss Lake told similar tales. Phantom songs on the wind, handwritten pleas carved into bark, sudden storms that swallow search teams. I keep the photo in a frame on my mantle, though I dread what might happen if I look at it too long. Sometimes at night, I wake hearing Jenna's voice humming that lullaby. I see Marcus's face in the mirror behind me, pale and wide-eyed, mouthing, "Help me." And I know, if I ever set foot near Foss Lake again, they will be waiting, because once the water touches you, it never truly lets go. I never knew gratitude could feel so heavy, like a stone pressed into your chest, making every breath a conscious effort. That was the weight I carried the afternoon I first laid eyes on the guest book. My boyfriend, Daniel, inherited his late uncle's lake house, a rustic A-frame on the northern shore of Silver Pine Lake, tucked deep among pines and hemlocks. He said the place had been in the family for generations, a retreat from the bustle of London, weekend fishing trips, summer barbecues, Christmas gatherings by the fire. I imagine laughter echoing off the wooden walls. When we arrived in late October, the air was already sharp with frost. The driveway, a narrow ribbon of gravel winding through skeleton trees, crunched beneath the tyres. The house looked abandoned, windows curtains shut, a clapboard sign half rotten, proclaiming simply, "Welcome friends." Inside, the musty scent of disuse settled over me. Dust floated in shafts of pale afternoon light through the living room windows. The furniture was covered in sheets, and stray pine needles littered the floor. A grand stone fireplace dominated one wall. In the mudroom, half hidden behind a pair of wellies, sat a wooden box on a pedestal table, its lid lay ajar, revealing a thick, leather-bound book resting inside. The cover was cracked and faded, patterned by decades of use. Its spine bore no title, only two embossed letters, G and B, framed by curling vines. Daniel saw me gaze and smiled. "That's the guest book," he said, brushing pine needles from the top. "Everyone who ever comes here signs it. Birthday parties, weddings, fishing derbies, you name it." He ran a finger along the leather edge. "I thought we could start our own page." I hesitated but lifted the book up anyway, breathing in its leathery musk. The pages were yellowed and brittle, each one crowded with handwritten names, messages of thanks, holiday wishes. "Thank you for the memories. Can't wait to return next summer. Love always, the Phillips family." Then I saw it. On the very last page, scrawled in a tremendous hand, a message half hidden by a dried scarlet stain. "Please, keep me in." A chill traced my spine. That night, I lay awake beside Daniel, the guest book tucked under my pillow, even though I didn't know why. The darkness felt alive, not empty. Every groan of wind against the roof sounded like a heartbeat just beyond the walls. Shortly after midnight, I bolted upright. The book had begun to tremble beneath my head, its spine creaking as though something inside was stretching, straining to break free. My fingers brushed its cover, and I felt a wetness, warm, slick. Hesitatingly, I lifted the book and flipped on my phone's flashlight. The last page lay open. The inked message, "Please, keep me in," had pooled in a dark circle, oozing through the paper like blood. A droplet, round and glycerin, rolled off the page and plopped onto the wooden floor with a quiet pat. I yanked the book away, my heart thundering in my ears. Daniel mumbled in his sleep, unmoving. I couldn't wake him. I bolted for the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face until I felt my pulse steady. When I returned, the book lay closed and pristine. No stain, no ink, no message. I pressed my palm against my cheek, blinking into the darkness. Surely this was a hallucination brought on by stress. I dragged the covers up to my chin and forced myself to sleep. By candlelight the next evening, I examined the guest book again. Every page bore heartfelt notes, nothing untoward, until I reached the final sheet. The paper felt strangely warm under my fingertips, as though fresh. I flipped it over. A single word, drawn in ink as black and glossy as oil, gleamed in the glow. Stay. Panic churned my stomach. I jumped and slammed the book shut. My candle glittered, flickered, and died, plunging me into semi-darkness. I groped for matches and relit it, the small flame dancing over the words. But when I opened the book again, the message had vanished, like a bruise lifting from the skin. I sank into the sofa, hugging my knees. The fireplace remained stubbornly cold. I couldn't bring myself to fetch logs. Instead, I lay back and stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks until the candle guttered out again. Daniel teased me over dinner, calling me Miss Spooky when I described the words. He signed the guest book himself, light, cursive handwriting, Emma and Daniel, October the 19th, 2024. Thank you for your hospitality. We barricaded the book in the mudroom box afterwards and turned in for the night. I drifted off uneasily, and I woke up at 12:13 a.m. to a scratching sound, a slow, methodical rasp coming from the mudroom door. Heart pounding, I crept down the hall. Daniel lay asleep beside me. I couldn't wake him again. I stepped into the foyer. The mudroom door stood open. Inside, the box lay on the floor, its lid off. On the dusty floor around it were new marks, tiny footprints like those of a child drawn in thick black ink. They led from the box across the wood planks to a fireplace henhouse, then vanished. My breath hitched. The ink itself seemed to pulse as if it were alive. I backed away, looming into the dark hallway, and I heard the door shut. I could barely speak by the fourth night. Every instant cried at me to flee, but some terrible curiosity rooted me in place. I'd spent hours in dim lamplight, notebooks and journals screwed around, researching forgotten families of Silver Pine Lake, local legends of drowned infants and errant child. None of it, or so I thought, explained the pool of ink forming nightly around that last page. That night, I opened the guest book to study the pages, searching for anything I might have missed. The scent of old paper was so strong it made my eyes water. On the final sheet, the ink formed a circular puddle, wider than before, and feet, tiny, wet footprints, dotted the edges, as though someone had stepped into the ink and paced around the page. Then I heard it, a soft weeping, barely audible, like a child sobbing in the next room. I froze. The sound came from inside the book, or so it seemed. I leaned closer. The tears became words. Don't leave me, please, I'm cold. They were in a voice that cracked and trembled like water pouring over the rocks. Ice formed on the nape of my neck. I recoiled, slamming the book shut so hard the spine rattled. I couldn't stand another night. I packed a small bag, my phone, a spare battery pack, a flashlight, and anything I thought might help fend off whatever lurked in those pages. I nursed the guest book under my arm like a petulant child's toy I had to return. At 11:58 p.m, I locked the mudroom and pried the lid off the wooden box. The book hovered inside, its pages trembling like a trapped animal's ribs. I pulled it out and carried it to the living room, setting it on the coffee table. Outside, the wind rose to a howl. Trees slammed against the house, rain dashed against the windows. The fire ignited on its own, a bright, hungry flame casting flickering shadows against the walls. I stumbled back. A tremor ran through the guest book. The final page fluttered up, ink spilled from between the pages, cascading in thick rivulets down onto the table, then the rug, Then my shoes. I scrambled back, but the ink followed like a living thing, pooling on the floor and curling its tendrils towards me. Then the weeping began, chorus-like, voices of children, desperate and raw, crying, "Emma, Emma, don't go." I pivoted, searching for Daniel's room, but he wasn't there. I told him tonight I was too fearful to sleep alone. He'd left hours ago to fetch blankets, he said, at the general store miles away. The fireplace's flames roared and leapt, spilling out words in glowing ember. "You promised. You said you'd stay." The book slammed open on its own. The pages turned faster than wind could blow them. The ink on the last sheet riffed and coalesced into shapes, twisted like figures, like children made of displeasure and shadow, dancing on the page. My flashlight fell from my hand. I scrambled backwards to the foyer. Doors began to rattle. Front door, back door, mudroom door, each slamming open in turn as though beckoning some unseen crowd inside. I burst out of the mudroom into the brisk night air, the door slamming behind me. The wind and rain battered me. The guest book, still in my grip, felt impossibly heavy. And then I heard footsteps padding across the rain-soaked porch, light, bare, direct, moving towards the front door. The ink feet prints led across the boards and up the steps, leaving a trail of ink that sizzled where it touched the rain, steam rising. I snarled in terror and hurled the guest book off the deck into the black water below. It slapped the surface once, twice, then sank out of sight, ink swirling into crimson clouds beneath the waves. Silence hit me like a blow. The footsteps stopped, the doors all clicked shut, the fire extinguished itself, leaving only embers. I crouched on the porch, soaked through to the bone, tears mingling with rain. I didn't know how long I sat there, minutes, hours. When the adrenaline finally slowed, I rose and staggered to the car. The key hung on the hook on the back of the mudroom door, which was now locked. I smashed the window with a heavy metal trowel, glass slicing my palm, crimson joining the ink in rivulets down my wrist. I didn't care. I slipped inside, started the engine with trembling fingers, and floored it down the gravel drive. Behind me, the house faded into a downpour, its windows dark, its porches empty. I didn't look back again. I found the guest book weeks later when I looked up the lake house on a listing site. Someone was selling it. I clicked on the photographs, the deck, the interior, and there it was, half submerged in a shallow cove beside the boathouse. Its leather cover glistened wet, the embossed GB glinting in the sun. When I zoomed in, every page was blank, not a trace of ink remained. I don't know what I released into that guest book or what I freed into the lake that night, but sometimes, in my flat on a foggy morning, I hear a soft drip, like water slipping through floorboards, and in my dreams I see a single page floating before me, its margins ringed with tiny footprints, the words scrawled in ink so dark they absorbed light. Thank you for keeping me in.